Patrick Deale is a Labour lawyer who's been involved in labour negotiations for many years. Patrick, good afternoon to you. Cosatu used to really have the power to bring the country to a halt for a strike. There was a time when almost half of those who worked in South Africa belonged to a union. How have things changed?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Things have changed a lot, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years. They've changed in the sense that the kind of middle hasn't held with the unity of the unions and the union's ability to hold the broad mass or the broad body of employees within a few coherent groupings, such as labour federations, such as SAF, Cosatu, and others. And as a consequence of that, there has been a disintegration of unification. And the more it splinters into small and small federations, I think there's something like 22 federations and something like 200 unions at the moment, that the more they splinter, the less of a voice they are able to muster in matters of socio-political, economic and workplace matters. And that's what's happened in a way also, Steve. And I think the splintering of the union movement generally is also reflected in the broader politics, which itself is also splintered, as we know, now with struggling coalitions and so on. So there's a kind of reflection about what's happening in the greater society on the political front, in the workplace front, in relation to unions. And unions have splintered over, political polarizations, different attitudes to what policy should be, what kind of macroeconomic policies we should to have, disputes with the government, who is their ally, on what those policies should be. And so the relationships have become colder between unions and government. And when those relationships get colder, it's harder for unions to muster strength within themselves to encourage others to rally behind their causes for greater societal change.
Patrick, there are plenty of people who complain about unions, and not just capitalists, but people who think that maybe it's this or maybe it's that, or it's a day of disruption. But unions have also played really important roles, and I'm not just talking about agitating for social change like the fight against apartheid. We see unions now often playing a very progressive role, for example, fighting for the rights of gay and lesbian people, and not just in the workplace. Right now there's a union who I think is probably going to play quite an important role in protecting a victim of the VIP protection unit assault that we saw on the N1. If unions get weaker, what happens to people? Do they end up being weaker too in any discussion against the bosses or political power generally?
I think they do. And the shift away from the emphasis on dealing with workplace issues, everyday issues that workers have to deal with, retrenchments and dismissals and wage disputes and so on. And as unions try and look for a greater degree of support amongst the unemployed, I mean, there's a massive quantity of 8 million or so unemployed constituency out there, that the unions are dealing more with civil society issues than workplace issues. And because of that, their attention is drawn away from the day-to-day life of a union member whose everyday needs and disciplinary inquiries and grievances and, troubles with their bosses are being neglected. And the union officials are unable to render the kind of service which they have traditionally been able to render when they're focused on workplace issues during these sort of so-called workerist union-based issues, unionization. These days, it's more kind of civil society type of issues, like we've seen the purpose of today. It's a laudable and absolutely understandable cause that this event today has been organized by Cosatu. But I think it's more to do with trying to rally around support wherever they can for a support so that they have a voice not only for the employed, but for the poor and also the marginalized employed as well. So people who do fall victim to abuse and so on can find themselves neglected while attention is spread too widely and too thinly elsewhere.
Patrick Deale, thank you, Labour lawyer.